Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the people, trust the products you depend on. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about medical devices, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I do have to emphasize I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. I'm a pharmacist, but I'm not your pharmacist. So this is neither legal advice nor clinical advice. These are considerations, but they don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the host, the guest, their employers, or their clients. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe, please share, and feel free to ask our guest questions. I already noticed that people are already commenting, which is awesome. So please feel free to reach out. You can always find me, by the way, on Twitter on Darshan Talks, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Today's interview is really interesting because it's a special interview for me for multiple reasons. Number one, it's someone that I have worked with in the past. It's someone I have known for, I guess at this point, about 10 years and longer, maybe. I've both worked with her as an instructor, as her instructor, and then she had me teach as well. So it's wonderful. It's like a homecoming for me to have her back. It's kind of exciting for me as well. I do want to emphasize a little bit about today's talk. She is the Director of Research Operations and Administration at the Children's Hospital of Colorado, which was a Pfizer supersite for the 5 to 11-year-old, the clinical trial for COVID for the 5 to 11-year-olds. She runs the Child Health Research Enterprise, which is a huge pediatric clinical research infrastructure. And I guess they have already run 700 plus trials, and they have 700 plus trials currently. Is that correct?
Some of that's right. So I think it's more, we're developing a division of Child Health Research Enterprise, kind of a more centralized infrastructure group for clinical research right now with 700 trials running concurrently, probably up to 1,200 if you include all a retrospective research that's going on across the campus. So we're a three-site campus. So we have a children's hospital, an adult hospital, and then CU and the CU Med School, all next to each other physically. We're in partnership on a daily basis. So tons of work going on. That number just reflects what's going on specifically to Child Health Research Enterprise studies. Some of that crosses over to the entire life cycle, but that's kind of where we're focusing.
So what you're telling me is it's a very small operation, like a mom and pop shop, if you will.
Yep.
But in all seriousness, it's super big, super massive, and you guys played a massive role in children now being able to get the vaccine. So let's start from the beginning. When you were involved in this, how did you guys get involved in the study?
Sure. I think there's probably two reasons we were selected. One, just constant work that we've done over the years, developing the infrastructure and the operational capabilities to support a trial of this magnitude. As anyone who's familiar with the Pfizer vaccine knows, you do have to have specific resources, including freezers and an investigational drug services team to dispense. And in the case of the supersite, we needed fully specialized teams. So we have the infrastructure, we have the resources, we have support from our highest level of leadership, but we also had an incredible PI who has done a ton of infectious disease work in the past, has been involved in clinical trials, who brought the expertise, who is reliable, who delivers beautiful data. And so I think it was, all of those put together. And then we were resourced appropriately, and we had the will to jump in and make it happen, even when we were exhausted, and probably the last thing that we needed to add to our plate. But it was a tremendously amazing experience. So awesome to watch, awesome to be a part of, and we're coming to the end, most likely the end of it. So we're doing well.
So let's ask the basic question. You actually said you needed specialized teams. What do you mean by specialized teams in this case?
So for a trial, well, for all of our trials and for most trials, investigational drug services is a part of it. We have a CTRC, which is the Clinical and Translational Research Corps of nurses, 9 full-time nurses and a manager over that team. We're also assigned the space to support that team. We have a Epic-specific team that supports all of our IT resources. We have a clinical trial maintenance system. We use Encore for that specifically. We have an incredible financial team that supports, basically costing, quoting, negotiation directly with sponsors and or grant proposals. We have a purely regulatory core that submits to the IRB of record. We have two primary IRBs we work with, which are Western and what we call COMERB. And so we have all these, the list goes on and on. The biggest lift, I would say here, where of course, having our research coordinator teams, we have about probably in the hospital more than, I would say, actively 100 plus research coordinators. For this specific trial, there were probably 20 that had their hands in it at some point on top of their day jobs. And we also were assigned a primary or a process improvement specialist who is incredible, and a project manager who's incredible, full-time for 30 hours a week for 30 weeks. And so they were the differentiators between us doing this or not doing this, because it was so nuanced, it was so complex. We were able to articulate, to our highest levels of leadership exactly what we were doing, and advocate, especially for safety, but also just all the resources that are required from, communication standpoint, all the way up to how do we get someone from the front door to the room itself. All of that is so complex, and people don't even, notice or know, but it was so huge, and we did it in such a short amount of time. So it was like the most epic team sport coming together. And we're, like I said, we're getting towards the end, and we've all become pretty close. And we're all really proud of the work, but it was huge amounts of work, and it couldn't be done if we hadn't been given those resources.
So what you're saying in many ways is that you guys were sort of prepping for an event like this for the longest period of time, because you guys weren't going to be chosen as a quote unquote supersite unless you had all these steps in place. And I've been to the hospital before, and I've always been impressed by the amount of effort and the amount of sort of processes you guys already have. So, which is really, really exciting. I guess my question for you, and so that people understand this and understand the risks that people are taking, what are the special precautions you guys took to ensure informed consent, to ensure that kids are being properly tested on?
Absolutely. So there's a multitude. So from a regulatory standpoint, the consent itself, at one point we did have electronic consents. We switched those back to paper. It just wasn't working for us, but we definitely, of course, had assents. The kids above the age of 7 did sign their own assents, which was, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of work and language, and really working. We had a team of child life specialists that came with us to help us, kind of reach kids at their own level, make sure it wasn't a scary situation, that we were fully explaining what this meant. And I can't like reiterate the complexity of bringing kids in for a trial where they're going to get a shot and them volunteering to do so, because most kids don't want to do that. I mean, most kids are terrified. So they were coming in. So many of them came like they were excited to be a part of it. They wanted to be a part of history. So there's that. There's all the regulations. There's all the consenting, the institutional review that was reviewed at a scientific level. It was reviewed at a feasibility level. All the consent language was reviewed multiple times by our legal and contracting team. So you have that. Then we had to also be really thoughtful. Most people who enrolled in this trial enrolled 25 people every week. We enrolled 25 people every day for 2 weeks. So we also we have an awesome safety team that got in there with us, and we ran mock codes. We ran how you operationalize getting someone into the door. The time. Our PI specialist Heather. We had up to the minute how long someone was going to be in getting consent, how long it was going to take them to get a nasal swab, a blood swab, or a blood draw. Then when we could release an order, in there you're randomizing. But we had mocks of all of this umpteen times. We walked through training umpteen times. And we also have to, for people who aren't in the research world, every single person had to be research trained. So they have to have CITI training. They have all of the HIPAA training, all the complex research on top of the protocol specific training. And then, we wanted to reiterate documentation practices for our site over and over again. hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of training time to get where we wanted to be. And we were fully prepared at every level for anything to happen. And thank goodness, nothing negative did happen, but we walked through it over and over again, including like, where is the signage? How do we get people from A to Z? So many levels of complexity, so many thoughtful ways to address, the language within the consents itself to make sure kids understood. We definitely did encounter situations where parents did consent and the kids didn't assent, and we did not move forward in the trial because it's absolutely up to them whether or not they wanted to participate. We had siblings that differed in their opinions, and one went forward and one did not. We had people that participated in the first visit and then decided to not participate in the second visit, and it's completely fine. Consenting is the most important thing we do. And I was so proud because at no time did I feel like there was any pressure on the kids and or their families to participate. In fact, I think we just made it just such a good, like the energy was great. The way we approached it was great, and it was completely up to them. And I think that was really empowering for them as, 5 to 11-year-olds, but just as kids as a whole, who most of the time kids don't get to voice really their yes or no. Their parents or their caregivers do that on their behalf. It was really neat to watch them sign their name or like sign their initials, and the great questions they have. And it probably doubled our consent time from what a typical consent is, because we wanted to make sure they knew what they were getting into, and we wanted to make sure that they wanted to move forward. So many levels of safety. I could go on and on and on. You might get bored, but I felt I would have been easily enrolled my child, and I would have been completely at ease with inviting anyone to participate in the trial itself.
And I think it's important to talk about this because there's been a lot of discussion, as we all know, around the safety and efficacy of the vaccine itself. And obviously, in the case of children, that becomes doubly complicated. So it's very reassuring to hear about the steps being taken to ensure that only the kids who wanted to be a part of the study actually were part of the study. And then to hear a little bit more about what steps were taken to ensure that they were safe throughout the whole process. So as we're talking about this, let's talk a little bit more about just the idea of oversight. So you talked about lawyers, you talked about your compliance department. Could you talk a little bit about how much oversight you had from the CROs? For those people who are listening in who are not from the clinical research world, that's the clinical research organization that oversees a individual study. So to the extent that a CRO or the sponsor was reviewing what you guys were doing, could you talk a little bit about what that involved?
Sure. We had consistent ongoing monitoring from day one. Pfizer partnered with ICON. We had another partner involved called 3Wire, but there was real-time submission of data same day. And so there was constant review. And we had, from the very beginning, excellent partnerships with our Pfizer representatives, on-site, blind and unblind. We had a full team of monitors, both on-site and off-site, reviewing data in real time to make sure, one, there were not any discrepancies, but that there wasn't any nuances or anything that they needed to rapidly escalate and problem solve or even pause on the side of a safety issue. So it's impressive the level of complexity involved with rolling out this trial while it's concurrently happening with all of these other sites, that they got in and that they were here in real time digging in with us. And we would have it was honestly ongoing conversation throughout the day, and to the point where sometimes we'd have to say, we've got to pause, and we're gonna talk about that at the end of the day when we're done with patients. But they were involved and engaged at every level, reviewing. It was a beautiful real-time process, which was very cool, coming from someone who has done trials that, the data might have been in, 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, a data lock later, to see this on, real-time data submission, and I'm assuming review at multiple levels, to get to where we got to the end, where then they could submit the data for rapid review from an FDA, CDC, and ultimately the EUA approval. You just kind of felt like you were engaged part of it. So I can't imagine the work that has gone on behind the scenes on behalf of Pfizer and Icon and all of our partners, but it's been very rewarding, and nothing but kudos to them for the work they've done.
So when you talk about this, you talked about the work that Pfizer and Icon are doing. How closely? We're in a world where the FDA is talking about risk-based monitoring, and the FDA is saying centralized monitoring, and what that, for those people who don't know what that means, the FDA is coming out and saying, look, if you've got a limited amount of resources, you don't want to spend the same resources going to sites that are doing well instead of going to the sites that need the help. And that's been obviously an area that companies are still struggling with after all these years, trying to understand what that actually means, because you don't want to be accused of not overseeing sites appropriately. In your case, did you see any level of risk-based monitoring? Were you guys being, in your opinion, overseeing too much, too little, or did you feel like it was just right? And then did you find the FDA coming in and looking at what you guys were doing closely?
So the FDA has not been on site yet. We are fully prepared for them to come on site. And I have never been more confident that if they walked in the door this afternoon, that we would be, this is the most beautifully done trial I have ever been a part of. So no, they haven't been here. Will they be here? Most likely. And we're prepared for it fully. We developed every single process to the level that there are no gaps in the way it was performed. It's like beautiful, and I can't say it was effortless because it absolutely wasn't effortless, but we brought our A game. As far as being over reviewed, or I felt like it was completely appropriate. As a mom of two girls, I would hope that there was consistent, real-time, constant review. I know there was a ton of consistent safety data evaluation. In my mind, when it comes to kids, there can never be too much. I say that as both a parent, as an administrator, I might differ depending on how that shows up. But I thought it was very impressive, and I really thought the most valuable part of it is that our partners were working to make things the best they could be, to optimize all of the processes and make sure that we were learning from each other as we walked through the study itself. And I think that's great because it didn't feel punitive in any way, as much as sharing best practices and helping each other out. So it was very cool to see this is going on all over the world, right? And we're a big part of it, but we were sharing things that other people were doing in other countries. It was very cool to be a part of this big entire process that is just part of history as a whole.
So I have a comment from Janan Sarwar. Excellent talk, very reassuring so far as attention to detail, consistency, and the quality of the study. So I know Janan's actually a mom of three girls. She seems to share your same concerns. So it's exactly the voice we want to hear, which is of people going, I want to give my kid the vaccine. How safe is it? Should I be expecting anything? So let's talk a little bit about the results. What have you seen so far? Obviously it was approved, but what was your experience like with the adverse events associated with the vaccine itself?
Everything that was reported is consistent with what we saw. And I've had more than 100 people ask me if I would allow my child to have the vaccine, and my little one, my 6-year-old's vaccinated, but my 8-year-old gets hers next week. I still 100% believe it's up to the parent or the caregiver or the guardian to make that decision for themselves, given what they know. From what I know, and I feel like I'm pretty well educated in the process and was part of the oversight, I really do feel like we're to a point where we know enough scientifically to support vaccination for this population, given the possible risks from receiving COVID and then receiving the vaccine. So I'm not privy to what every site shared. Yeah, I'm just privy to what we shared. And it was I'm used to doing rare disease studies or even life-saving or life lengthening studies. So this is a totally different way of looking at things. Sometimes you're trying to do risk-benefit analysis to, very severe side effects versus prolonging someone's life. So it was just a new way of looking at things. But again, I think it's completely up to the parent, caregiver, and the family as a whole, including the child. So I'd recommend it, but I'm just me.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about what happened. So we know that and sort of not beating anyone else to the punch, everyone knows that the vaccine was approved for children between the age of 5 to 11, I believe. The question I have for you is, now that it's approved, what happens to the kids who are getting placebo?
So as of last week, when the EUA was finally approved, we basically, the way it works is we had 252 kids that participated in the trial. From there is a 2-to-1 randomization, vaccine to placebo. So what you have to do at that point is you have to call, if people aren't familiar with the process, called unblinding. You basically go in, we do it via a system that's only made privy to people that can see the information to whether the child received vaccine or placebo. From there, reached out and wanted to, see if the patient wanted to continue. And they were unblinded and then given the option to continue in the protocol. If they received the vaccine, they'll continue in the protocol for the next, it's a total of, I believe, 2 years, some nuances there. If they receive placebo, we then asked them if they wanted to continue participation, which means that we would bring them in. We would vaccinate them twice, just like any other child received it, 3 weeks apart, plus or minus 3 days. And from there, that kind of started happening middle of last week. Our team made, I didn't make one, so I'm not going to take ownership. Our incredible team, on top of all the work that they're doing, made individual phone calls to every single family and spoke to every single caregiver and, re-educated on the breadth and depth of the protocol, what this meant, and then asked if they wanted to proceed. So there are people, people are starting to come in, get their, that were on placebo to get their dose. And then there are people at this point that wanted to get their dose on Saturday. They found out they had a child on placebo, and they decided that they weren't going to continue in the trial, and they were going to go to, their local center and get their dose. And that is completely within their power as a parent and as an advocate for their child. We would love for them to stay in, hoping that they could wait it out a couple days or even a couple weeks to get them back in to get it under the context of the trial. But, there's so much anxiety associated with COVID. And I really do see people, like, not just, physical health of COVID is one thing, but the mental health burden amongst our children and our families is astronomical. And if getting it on Saturday morning instead of waiting till Monday mitigated something in them, and that I completely understand, and that's part of the context of consent. We also are hoping that if they did get a dose off trial, we're still going to continue or possibly continue them in the trial as a whole, just to make sure we're watching for adverse events long term. So more to come on all of that, but it was really complex and really amazing, but just the magnitude of patients that then have to be, they have to all come back in. They have to get reassessed, and they have to reconsent, and they have to get, also, it's complex. I'll leave it at that. And our team has just continued to be resilient and go, and to offer the resources and to be available. And we're getting people in as absolutely as soon as we can. But I would say one of the biggest struggles is explaining to parents why it's so complex and why it's not just as easy as them walking into a local public health center. The documentation required, the unblinding, all of the nuances of research are a lot more cumbersome than just walking in and getting your dose and leaving with your card. So I get it, but that's what we've been doing. Other things that we've been doing, our governor of our state actually had all of the kids that participated, invited them down to a press conference, which was really, really neat. And stood on the Capitol steps, and he told them they were heroes and thanked everyone that participated, and they were stoked and excited and adorable. And but it was very meaningful for them to get that feedback and for them to understand what their contribution really meant, whether it was placebo or not. So that's what we've been doing.
Which is really interesting. Now, one of the other complaints from people who think the vaccine is not the right direction to go is that they don't believe that the vaccine is itself efficacious. So we spoke about safety, about efficacy. How did you guys evaluate even in an unblinded fashion, whether the vaccine was efficacious or not?
So all we did is contribute data. So we were not part of the statistical analysis or scientific analysis. I know our PI was part of some of those conversations, but we clearly were just the infrastructure and the process developers to get the data to where it needed to go. So that's not within our hands. But I've reviewed it, and I'm sure most parents have reviewed it. And all of the experts at all the other levels clearly have reviewed it, and it seems to have a pretty good efficacy. And sometimes I think, at least at my level, I put the trust in the people that are in those roles to provide that information, reviewing it on your own. But there's some things from a scientific perspective that I don't understand. I won't ever claim to understand, because that's not my role.
But let me rephrase that question though. What kind of tests were done? Were there like lab panels done? Were there IgG tests done? Like what was the type of testing that you ran to provide the data? Now, you couldn't speak to the efficacy itself, but you could speak to the data that was provided, that was evaluated
Sure.
for every individual patient. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we had so pre-dosing nasal swabs and pre-dosing blood draws, full panels that were sent same day. We had an amazing lab specialist that processed and got those out into a central site, as did every other site. If anyone became ill during the trial itself, whether just side effect of the vaccine or which didn't happen, but just people did develop, especially I'm assuming the kids that were on placebo, if they had COVID, we definitely did, draws on them. But long-term also seeing, so you had your pre-dose, and then you had another draw that was done prior to the second dose, and they're completely looking at the immune response inherent to the vaccine being introduced, but also any other changes in labs within those dosing time periods. Every child was evaluated and had to do a physical examination upon second dose, and then we'll receive concurrent evaluations. And every family, we had quite a few sibling pairs, received what's called a data diary. If there was more than one sibling, they got a phone, but they all received an app, and they tracked any side effects. And when I say any side effects, it could be they fell off their bike and broke their arm, even though that has nothing to do with the vaccine. As anyone who's familiar with research knows, adverse event tracking is cumbersome and complex, but they will be reporting their adverse events for up to 2 years. And so they kind of love it. Some of them don't like it at all, but some of them think it's very cool to submit that. And this is their contribution. So we definitely hyped that up. We definitely encouraged them to be as frequent reporters as possible. And so we're going to see, we'll get more data. We're not super far out from the primary dose. So we'll see, and we'll get more data, and we'll add to see, kind of what the outcomes are from there. And that's how we learn more on a daily basis about every drug. So there's so many levels of evaluation and contribution. And I don't know, everyone was such a great part of it, and the kids themselves were clearly a part of it also.
Now, one of the big questions that comes up is this idea of we've now done the 5 to 11-year-olds. It was approved, I believe, not approved, but there was an EUA for 12-year-olds and above, and then there was adults, obviously. Are there any plans that you are aware of as a Pfizer supersite? I expect you guys already being inundated with other studies. Is there any discussion about kids younger than 5?
So I believe they're actively running a trial for kids younger than 5, because we are a supersite and because we wanted to do the best we possibly could given what we have. We decided to not participate in any younger age trials.
Okay.
Our staff is I think we're at max capacity. We did a beautiful job. We enrolled, almost 10 times more than most other sites, and we just wanted it to be as clean as possible. And we did feel, and that we have absorbed our part. We've been doing a ton of other COVID studies, biobanks, repositories, name it. We've done work with it. We have incredible amount of physician and nurse scientists adding to data all over the world. So we kind of got to the point, and we just said, we're not going to do. we are here. We want to be safe. We want to do this right. We want to make sure our staff's physical and mental health is supported. We have all of our other trials active and open. So this is where we're going to stop, and we're going to do it. Our CEO called it our Super Bowl. She was so supportive and great, but she also acknowledged, and I felt really supported by our C-suite as a whole to say, enough is enough. We're going to be great, and we can't be great at everything. So we're going to be great at this, and then we're going to step back and continue on with our daily jobs.
Now, speaking of your daily jobs, now that you've participated in the Super Bowl, as you put it, my question for you is, what are the ramifications of being a Super Bowl team? Do you now have infrastructure in place because of the Super Bowl, that your studies are now going to be at that higher level? Because not because you didn't try to do it before, but because you had the support, you had the teams all come together towards this one effort. And do you think what is the impact on future studies because of this?
I think the impact on future studies is more culturally driven by the fact that, one, we were extremely thoughtful, about diversity and inclusion in the study. So there was talks with all of our teams, not only in the hospital, but throughout our community, about how we recruit more diverse patient populations. So that conversation, although it has happened in the past, was magnified. We had multiple community-based partners engaging with us with vaccination, conversation about vaccination adherence. We had support from our public health partners. We had translators involved. We had, monolingual speaking Spanish families that came to us, and we had people that went to those communities to engage. So I would say the biggest change came from the fact that people know, one, we're doing research, because research is always in the background. It's part of our mission, but people have no idea how much work goes into this on a daily basis, and how much, honestly, resourcing goes into it. But so I think that changed. And then for people to see and read that we were a super center, I think that's great. I think there's a lot more eyes on how do we become not only one of the best, because I think we are one of the best places, but I think how do we become the best? And how do we resource that appropriately? The biggest thing I can think of is having that process improvement person, our project manager, to streamline the processes and put it all together and mitigate some of the complexity and coordination, but also to use our telehealth and our IT infrastructure, because there are a lot of tools that we have to change in the context of COVID for consent adherence or long-term follow-up for people who don't want to come on site or something like that. That wasn't done necessarily in the context of this trial. That's the biggest changes that I've seen in the context of COVID as a whole, including, regulatory documentation being done remotely, lab sign-off being done remotely, evaluations, consents being done remotely, or through, some sort of e-survey. So mountains were moved, but I don't necessarily think it was anything we hadn't thought of before. It was just processes were rapidly implemented because this was so important to us, and because we didn't want to drop the ball on continuing with research. I will say, I think people know that we're doing it, and so it's going to get bigger and bigger because people are passionate about it and they want to move it forward. So culturally, as far as space, we have beautiful space. As far as resourcing, we have an incredible philanthropy team that tries to get resources to support us. We have an amazing leadership team that is 100% on board, but even just to get our nurses or the security staff, or everyone to understand that we're doing research and to understand the safeguards behind it and to change the way they think about it in their language. And hey, you should possibly participate in that, or understanding what controls are, something like that. I mean, our ultimate goal is everyone walks in the door, they're part of a research protocol. We're not there yet. We would love to be there. So I say it's purely cultural. But yeah, we're doing a lot. Things got better and better, but nothing, catastrophic, nothing huge, just in the context of this Pfizer trial.
So I do want to emphasize that Julie Montalongo goes, you are a supersite. So your talk has already been changing hearts and changing minds. So that's always a good thing to hear. Here, let me ask you this. I usually I do these as I probably told you. These are usually about 15, 20 minutes long. But this was an incredibly important discussion, and we haven't even touched the surface. So I'm going to ask you one question before I ask you 5 questions I usually ask most of my guests. The one question I'm going to ask you right now is if you are obviously ready for the Super Bowl, what does preparing for the Olympics look like to you? What more can you do? You talked about awareness. What could awareness look like for you that you go, okay, we've hit that goal, if that makes sense?
At an institutional level, awareness is that every single person that works on our team for Children's is fully aware that we are participating in research and is able to speak what that means. From a bigger perspective, that every single study we do, the data integrity is absolutely so beautiful that it doesn't need to ever be reworked. That people, we get constant solicitation to participate in trials, but I ultimately want us to be the site that, like, we're such a super site, we're such a center of excellence that the processes are so fluid, but also developed to where there's not 6 months of startup work behind it, right? We have standard contractual clauses. We know, pricing on each side. We understand what we're working with. We understand the resourcing of the center itself, so that there's this, constant conversation between all of the companies and the NIH to see us as a super site. To fully and 100%, I would love to take the burden of operations visibility off of our PIs and make that something that they know, that they say, I want to contribute to the science. And I say, it'll be ready in 30 days. And this is, whatever that might be. I think our scientific teams are they're such superstars, but it's on top of their workload. And I want to mitigate that burden on them and make it easy to contribute to science and let them, optimize how they contribute here instead of being in the nuances of the day-to-day complexities with research startups.
Very, very cool. So as you know, I'm going to ask you 5 questions.
I did not know that, so I wish I knew. This is like David Letterman, or that's top 10, huh?
It's sort of like David Letterman.
Okay.
But he's cooler and smarter than I am, so just take it for a grain of salt. What would you like to ask the audience?
I guess I'd like to ask, is there anything that we haven't shared or talked about that would be interesting in the context of this work that you'd want to know about, or anything specific to your kiddos or your family that would help you make a more educated decision and being a part of a trial and or part of receiving the vaccine?
I normally would have an answer for that, but I feel like I asked you all of those, so I'd be curious what they come up with as well. This one we kind of have been showing the whole way through, but how can people reach you if they have questions?
So I'm not a tweeter. I don't have enough time for tweets. Maybe I should. I haven't joined that side of social media yet. So my email address is probably the easiest, but I would say the easiest is always text. So I can share that with you if anyone wants that.
Fair enough. I'm sure if people reach out to me, I'll make sure that they reach out to you in the appropriate way. Here's a different question. What's something you learned in the last month?
Learned in the last month. I think the proudest I am is how dedicated our team is. Like, they could have been like, I am done, I am exhausted, we're not doing this, but it's not even that they're showing up, but it's still operating at this high level of, how do we do this the absolute best way? So I think my faith in humanity has been restored once again by working with this team. And it just also has taught me how much people on our team are dedicated to the mission as a whole. So that's okay. My biggest learned goal.
What made you happy in the last week?
The happiest was Governor Polis telling the kids that they were heroes. They were so cute. It was, we had this one girl who gave a speech, and you could tell she was, I don't remember how old she is. I think she's 7, but she planned her whole outfit, and then she spoke in front of the governor's press conference, and she was so eloquent and beautiful, and she's going to be both of our bosses one day, Darshan. I'm 100% sure.
I love it.
But after she gave her speech, her whole body, you could see her up at the podium, and it was
that's awesome.
The best part of COVID by far. And I told her that afterwards. She was great.
By the way, we have a question already from Julie. Is children's interested in making research more accessible across the CHCO system versus primarily the Anschutz campus?
Julie Montalongo, who I actually know and adore. That is, I hope that if and when I retire from children's, that is something that I have done. That is what I would love to be my like my ultimate goal, is to make it, especially down to like the Pueblo area, more rural areas. And I think that's one thing COVID has brought us, like that accessibility, being able to offer all of our trials everywhere, including 7-state region. So we're not there yet. We have to get our full house in order and our deck complete before we start to roll that out. But I see that happening, and you're one of 100 people that's asked that exact same question. So I think we will get there.
I think that's so awesome. And last question, what is something most people don't know about you?
Let's see about me. I am fascinated by like herbs and plants, and I'm starting a 500-hour herbal certification in January to learn how to like forage in the forest and make my own fun things. So I think that's probably, and I have two most people know, but I have two golden retrievers. They're staring at me right now, wondering why I'm and so I'm a huge dog lover. And besides that, I'm a mom of 2 girls, and they're the best. I even have a teenager, and she's not even awful. Like she's like an awesome kid, and I don't know how I got so lucky. So there's 3.
That is as Julie puts it, that's exciting. I think she means that from multiple different levels. Again, obviously, this was an incredibly valuable, incredibly important conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. Any last parting words?
No, I'm thank you for having me. You know, I adore always spending time with you. I love that you're doing this as one of your 70,000 jobs. I try to keep an eye on it as much as I can, and I'm just glad that I was able to spend time with you.
Erin, this was an absolute pleasure. I do hope you'll consider coming back. I know everyone loves having you on, and everyone loves hearing from you. So we'd love to have you back. So thank you again.
Of course. Have a great rest of your week, Darshan.
You too.